and watch every ripple as the sun reflected off of it. To get up early in the morning and to go out and to appreciate the dewdrops on the flowers and on the leaves, and to marvel at the way the reflections turned them into mirrors and showed me the trees and the clouds and the skies around me. I remember how easy it was when I was a child to be aware of God's splendid power enveloping me and shrouding me in the magic and the mystery that is creation. That same wonder could follow me inside at Christmas time, and I remember how on Christmas Eves I would sit enchanted in a large sanctuary, watching in wonder some painful and yet hope-filled drama for Christmas. Remembering with the communion of saints that thrilling night when the angels sang and the shepherds bowed and a king quivered with fear before the star that brought light in the darkest of nights, the dead of winter. As an adult, I learned about supernovas and black holes. A supernova is a star that has exploded and is many times its normal brightness, and some astronomers tell me that supernova then collapses and becomes a black hole. Something so tiny we wouldn't even recognize it, but so heavy that its gravitational pull pulls in planets and stars and perhaps galaxies, and who knows where it'll stop. And I remember thinking when I heard about that, that's sort of what was happening at Christmas time. The God of all creation was exploding with the beauty of creation, and then somehow condensing and pulling together and becoming heavier and more potent and more significant as that God is born in the form of a baby in a manger in Bethlehem. I'm a person who hasn't yet had enough, hasn't yet had my fill of the wonders of creation. I haven't grown so old that I can't still dream. I've not grown tired of the abundance of the world. I'm not yet weary of the banquet table that we call life. The Christmas story is still a story for me. It is a story of the unbelievable wonder of the God of everything becoming one of us, like you and me, crying in the middle of the night, dirtying diapers, thrilling as a parent picks us up to comfort us. It was a shock then, later on in life, when I discovered that the story of the wise men didn't end with the wise men. The story of the wise men had a little bit more. It had about a King Herod who was terrified of that star. It was a story about a king so filled with fear, so angry and filled with hate, that king would be willing to slaughter dozens, possibly hundreds of innocent children to protect his power, to protect his prestige, to protect his privilege. We have then this amazing contrast between the wise men, foreigners who didn't know the prophecies of Israel, that didn't understand about the Messiah that was expected, but who saw a star, who knew that it meant that something new and different was happening in the universe, and instead of being afraid of what was new and different, left everything behind to discover it. It's like if I were to throw a pebble in that pond and not see ripples. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be normal. Would I run away in fear? Or would I toss another pebble to see if the created order had somehow changed? We have the three wise men, or however many there were over here, exulting in the new thing that God is doing in the world. And on the other hand, we have Herod. Herod's got it all. He's called Herod the Great, you know. Great as in big. Great as in powerful. Not great as in righteous. Not great as in loving. Not great as in doing good things for people. Herod's known for building temples, for building fortresses, for building aqueducts and highways. And by doing that, by being a tyrannical oppressor of the people of his country. It is no coincidence that the fortress of Herodium, boy, my brain. Herodium, named after Herod, is a whole mountain that has been hollowed out and turned into a fortress to keep him safe. It's no accident that Masada, the great fortress on top of an impenetrable plateau, was built by Herod. It's no accident that there were signal stations all across Israel where fires could be lit to warn Herod if there was an uprising. The people lived in fear and terror of Herod, the so-called Great. What terrified Herod so much? What terrified Herod is that some strangers from a foreign place came and said, "We saw a star. We saw that God was doing something new and different, and we believe that this star has to do with a new chapter in the history of your kingdom." A new chapter. That's not good news for the king. That's not good news for the president. That's not good news for the person of power and privilege and prestige. Because a new thing can almost only mean that they're going to be diminished. Diminished. And so it's important to nip that off in the bud. To take it while it's still an infant. And he found out from the wise men that the child star had come up maybe a year and a half or so before. And so he gave the order that all of the innocents, not the guilty pickpockets of Bethlehem, not the unscrupulous merchants of Bethlehem, not the crooked tax collectors of Bethlehem, it was the innocent babies of Bethlehem that Herod felt he needed to kill to protect himself. This wasn't new for Herod. He'd killed a wife. He'd killed some of his kids. Killing people to keep himself safe was part of what Herod was about. And fear was the seed that lay at the root of all of Herod's ruthlessness. You see, fear is a seed that gets planted. And it bears a plant that we can call hatred. And hatred bears a fruit. And that fruit is always death. The slaughter of the innocents. The death of those who have done nothing wrong, because fear has been planted in the hearts of the king. We live in a dangerous time right now, my friends. We live in a very dangerous time because it's becoming easier and more popular to plant fear in the lives of others. When you listen to the discourse in our political world, when you read the stuff that is put on the internet, people are getting angry over virtually nothing, and they are responding by striking fear into the hearts of other people. Name calling is becoming a popular thing to do, and we look for new and different names to call each other. All of them subhuman names. All of them subhuman names. Have you ever noticed how in every war we have to dehumanize the enemy? The enemy, they were Krauts. They were Wops. In Southeast Asia, they were Gooks. In the Pacific, they were Jacks. Today, they're ragheads. Who will it be tomorrow? We throw out names to turn people into less than human beings so that we can fear them more, direct greater hatred toward them, and eventually to destroy them. The best word that I have ever heard about love comes from Jesus Christ, who says, love your enemies. Love your enemies. Love doesn't call someone a name that dehumanizes them. Love does not direct hate and ill will towards another human being. But how can we possibly love our enemies? It's easy for me to love my family, most of the time. It's easy for those who are rooting for the same team that I'm rooting for to love them. Those who are part of the same United Methodist Church as me to love them. It's hard for me to love those who intentionally cause me ill. It's difficult for me to love them. How can I possibly love them? The best sermon on the topic I've read was from Martin Luther King Jr. He preached it at a Christmas time, 50 years ago, I think? 50 years ago. He said the first thing in loving one's enemy you have to do is to forgive them. When they have become your enemy, when they have done something to injure you, the first thing you must do is forgive them. Because you can't love someone that you hold a grudge against. And the first thing that you have to remember when it comes to forgiveness is that forgiveness starts with the person who's been injured. We always want the other person to come apologize, don't we? I'm not going to forgive you until you come on your hands and knees and beg me for forgiveness. King says, don't wait for it. It may not ever happen. You've got to initiate forgiveness if you feel aggrieved. And how can you initiate forgiveness to somebody who has intentionally caused you harm? Well, one of the ways King says is to remember that the most evil person has some good in them. And the very best person has some bad in them. And when you get up and look in the mirror in the morning, you look at yourself with wide open eyes and remember that not only are you a beloved child of God who has done miraculous good in your lifetime, you are also a schnook that probably ought to get on your hands and knees and grovel for some forgiveness. If not from your enemy, then from your family members. Amen. A week or two ago, I talked about some of what I did to some of my family members, and I X'd them off a picture of the family. Do you remember that? I should be on my hands and knees begging their forgiveness. And why does King say we have to do this? Because King reminds us that hatred cannot conquer love. No, hatred cannot conquer hatred. Only love can conquer hatred. Only love can conquer hatred. How might that look in the real world? Well, I look back at President Lincoln for a clue as to what that might look like in the real world. There was somebody, Edwin Stanton, who was a political power in the time of Lincoln, and who hated Abraham Lincoln, and who demeaned Abraham Lincoln and made fun of him because of his looks and made fun of him because of the way he talked and railed against him in every way that he possibly could. And one of his descendants is a pretty good friend of mine, the Methodist minister, by the way. And when Lincoln was elected president and was selecting his cabinet, he needed someone to serve as Secretary of War. And who did he nominate for that position? Edwin Stanton. And people came to him and said, "Are you crazy, Lincoln? Don't you know who this guy is? Don't you know how he's going to undermine everything you do? Don't you see how he's going to make it his agenda to keep you from getting anything done?" And Lincoln says, "I certainly know who he is. And I certainly know what he thinks of me. But when I look around the country for someone, he's the best one for the job. He's the best one for the job." And when Lincoln was assassinated, Stanton was at the funeral. And Stanton stood up and called Lincoln one of the greatest people the world has known, and said that now He belongs to history. Because Stanton had been converted. He was no longer Lincoln's enemy. You can shoot somebody in the head and they die, your enemy. You can love somebody, forgive them, and draw them in with arms of compassion. And you've killed your enemy and given new life to a friend. New life to a friend. There is a star in the sky that's been put there by God. And it's to give light to our world and to remind us that this baby born in the manger came only to love. Only to love. Came only to forgive us of all of our misdeeds, only to empower us through the Holy Spirit to do the work of God in our world. And that star invites us today to come to this table, a table at which everybody is welcome, a table that is filled with the goodness of God's love, the promise of reconciliation. We call it a service of communion, of being one with each other and with God. So I ask you, my friends, to remember the lesson of the wise men. You can't get to Bethlehem without going through Jerusalem. You can't find the child of God if you aren't willing to see the power and the privilege and the hatred and the death that the world has to offer. But once you've seen that and decide to leave by a different way, to go away a different person than you came, then you know salvation and you can become a part of the salvation of the world. Praise be to God. Amen.